breakthroughs, or let me correct that, constructive steps towards progress, we will do that. But I'm not going to in any way tell you that I'm optimistic. I'm not optimistic. I feel that there is a lack of a strategic desire. If you just remember very quickly, those who killed Rabin were Israeli extremists who was against Rabin's attempt to achieve peace with the Palestinians. So the U.S.'s role is biased. It was instrumental in not solving this over the last 70 years because it provided Israel with a political shield against accountability.
Hi, my name is Sukanya Saha and you're watching Hindustan Times. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Mr. Nabil Fahmy, Egypt's former foreign minister and a distinguished career diplomat with decades of experience in navigating the complexities of Middle Eastern geopolitics. Mr. Fahmy has served as Egypt's ambassador to the United States and Japan, and his latest publication, Egypt's Diplomacy in War, Peace and Transition, offer a comprehensive look in Egypt's evolving role on the global stage. Today, as a key architect of Egypt's foreign policy and a seasoned mediator in regional conflicts, Mr. Fahmy will offer us today invaluable insights into the ongoing Israel-Hamas war and Cairo's critical role in seeking a sustainable truce amid rising tensions. Welcome to the show, Mr. Fahmy.
Thank you for your kind invitation.
So Hamas said on Friday that it rejected new conditions in a Gaza ceasefire proposal that US-led mediators presented during 2 days of talks in Qatar. Diplomatic efforts have so far failed to alleviate the suffering endured around 1 year of war. But US President Joe Biden insisted after the latest round of talks that we are closer than ever in securing a truce deal. So how does Egypt address concerns that its roles in negotiations is influenced more by its domestic security and counterterrorism priorities than by regional stability or humanitarian considerations?
Well, my direct answer to you is that we're 7,000 years old. So we have a long experience in dealing with geopolitical issues and domestic priorities at the same time. All countries have to take into account their public, but at the same time, they look into the regional context. And most of the time, there's no real contradiction between your regional interests and the desires of the public, although the public can be a bit emotional, understandably so, and frankly, correctly so in this case. I'd like to just make a brief comment about your introduction, which is correct, but just to add to it, what we see as being discussed here are proposals to implement Security Council resolution adopted upon the proposal by the US back in May, which embraced the Biden proposals, but also added to them that these proposals are meant to be a ceasefire package towards the ultimate solution between Palestine and Israel with two states. It also emphasized that the contiguity of the territories between Gaza and the West Bank had to be preserved physically and also in terms of governance. What I've seen Hamas raise the last few days, and I just here draw a line that I don't think it's complete to say the responsibility is on Hamas. The Israelis have not yet agreed to the proposals as we have all seen them. And Hamas has actually said that they've agreed to the proposals back in May and then again in July. What they object to is not the proposals. What they object to is additional requests by the Israelis, whether they are with respect to Netzarim corridor, the Philadelphia corridor, or the actual percentage and people of incarcerated to be released.
So Egypt has traditionally positioned itself as a key mediator in Middle Eastern conflicts. given the lack of breakthrough despite months of negotiations, is Egypt's mediation strategy now failing, or are there external factors that have severely limited Cairo's influence this time?
Our strategic objective is peace between Arabs and Israelis. We want to build the future of the Middle East in stability and security. You cannot build that based on a military conflict. It has to be based on a resolution of the political problems that exist. Military is a tool to achieve an objective, but it's not a solution. The objective ultimately is resolve the conflicts between the two sides. In this case, we're talking about Palestine and Israel, and allowing both of them to have their national identity, but at the same time, their sovereignty in a respectable landmass that's also contiguous. So we will continue to pursue this as often and as hard as we can. We started the war in '73. We started the peace process immediately after that, and we haven't flinched. Are we disappointed? Are there problems? Yes, of course. We actually felt the Security Council resolution, if implemented immediately, would have been an excellent way to move things forward. If we feel that parties are in complete violation or are distorting the peace process, then it raises questions about our efforts to try to bring them together. But as long as we see some opportunity to make constructive breakthroughs, or let me correct that, constructive steps towards progress, we will do that. But I'm not going to in any way tell you that I'm optimistic. I'm not optimistic. I feel that there is a lack of a strategic desire to end the conflict. That's really where I see the problem, not the details. The details are excuses for not concluding the conflict.
Right. So, Mr. Fahmy, what specific mechanisms or assurances is Egypt pushing for this time to assure that any truce reached now is durable and not just a temporary pause in hostilities?
That's really an excellent point, and I thank you for raising it. It takes me back again to Security Council resolution that I mentioned, because that resolution embraces the Biden proposals that deal with Gaza per se, but it also, links them to the continuity of Gaza and the West Bank and the two-state solution. We will continue to bring those elements together. Another point, and that's one of the points now being debated and where there's disagreement, we do not agree under any circumstances that there be a reoccupation de facto or de jure of Gaza. Our problem with the continuation of Israeli forces in Gaza is that means that we are legitimizing de jure or de facto that Israel has a right to be in Gaza, and we don't agree with it. There's a distinction between security measures linked to a political process and enabling one party, in this case, the occupying party, to regain territory again. With this time, it would actually appear to be with the blessing that they need to be there for security reasons. And I don't see peace through security. I see security through peace.
Mr. Fahmy, is Egypt under pressure, any kind of pressure from the US or regional powers to make a particular stance? And how does it manage such pressures while maintaining its regional leadership, you think?
Yes, we are under pressure. We have the politics, the geopolitics. The US and Egypt share the desire that this step be a step towards a two-state solution. The US may have a different position on some issues, may feel that they need to get things done within a time frame related to their politics. On the other hand, we in the region understand that this is not about a status quo. It's not about establishing a new status quo. Status quo, the conflict has been going on for over 70 years. every time we have a ceasefire that's not immediately coupled with a conclusive peace process, we end up with extending occupation. And that's not something we're going to agree to. But we share with the US a desire for conclusion. And frankly, we live in the region, and this is on our border. So it's extremely important for us to resolve it. But again, we can look at mechanisms for security arrangements, but they will not provide security in the absence of resolution of the conflict issue. So peace is the foundation for security arrangements. It's not the other way around.
So, with Hezbollah's recent strikes on Israel and the potential for a broader regional conflict, how does Egypt assess the risk of spillover into other parts of the Middle East? Does Cairo believe it has sufficient influence to prevent a wider escalation involving Lebanon, Syria, and Iran, where recently Haniyeh was killed?
Let me be very candid with you. Alone, of course not. We do not have that kind of influence. Nobody does. Even the US has not been able to prevent that, and the US is a superpower. So we don't claim that we can solve this alone. If we could have, we would have done it a long time ago. We need to get the parties themselves, and the regional parties, regrettably, have failed to do so up till now. The conflict has been going on for 70 years, and it does extend beyond Palestine, Israel, into the regional areas, be that Lebanon, the Golan, and you've seen now recently all the way to Iran. So there is a tremendous danger that this may get out of hand intentionally or by miscalculation. It's not only miscalculation, and it's not only intentional activities. So are we concerned? Well, there's no question. And we keep trying harder and harder. But your point is excellent. This tension doesn't make us provide options on the table that will end into a new status quo. We want concrete arrangements to reduce and disengage the parties militarily, but it has to be part of a process that legitimizes occupation and ultimately lead to resolving the conflict. Otherwise, 10 years down the line, you will have somebody else being interviewed with the same questions being put to them.
So Israel insists on maintaining troops along the Philadelphia corridor to prevent Hamas from rearming. Does Egypt view this as an infringement on the sovereignty, or does Cairo tacitly support this measure as necessary for regional security?
No, we don't support the measure at all. We don't believe it's important. The irony of all this is that we opposed Israel when it had occupied Gaza. When they decided to withdraw in 2005, we told them that the withdrawal should be in coordination with the Palestinian Authority to make sure that things were handed over in a correct fashion. They withdrew, not because, the pronouncement then was they were withdrawing to consolidate in the West Bank. So they wanted to actually expand their presence in the West Bank. Now what they're arguing for now is they want to reoccupy land that they had withdrawn from. That is something that we believe is a cause for instability in the region. It's not that it threatens our border. Of course, if there are active military operations on the border, it creates tension. But the real problem is we will not agree to reoccupation and give that legitimacy under the guise of security arrangements. We can think of many, many ways to provide security arrangements without the presence of Israeli forces. And if you link it to a concrete, time-sensitive negotiating process towards resolving the conflict, you will end up having sustained peace.
So the ongoing displacement and civilian suffering have drawn international condemnation. Is Egypt prepared to take a harder stance against Israel this time in the Truce talks, or are there specific concessions that Egypt is unwilling to push for?
One of the real pressures we are under in this process is we cannot condone the continuation of Palestinian humanitarian suffering in Gaza. So on the one hand, we're trying to negotiate a political resolution. But on the other hand, we know that if this takes too long, those suffering are the Palestinian civilians on the ground. So we have this dual sense of pressure. And that's really where the pressure is in our own domestic community. They do not feel that Palestinians should face these. There are 40,000 deaths, at least, among Gazans. A good over I think about 40% of them are women and children. How can you condone that? How can you claim that you are a civilized country or a civilized nation and condoning this? So we don't condone this. We have tried to provide humanitarian assistance, but also one of the reasons behind our sustained, non-ending efforts to achieve a ceasefire, hostage exchange, and an action plan towards resolving the conflict was to relieve the tensions. But it's a tremendous, if you want, socioeconomic and sociopolitical component of our thinking.
So you just mentioned the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which has reached alarming levels with 40,000 people dead. Most of them are women and children. While Egypt has opened the Rafah crossing for limited aid, critics argue that Cairo could do more. What is Egypt's red line when it comes to fully opening its border to Gaza? And what are the risks and challenges in doing so, you think?
When the Palestinians were on the other side of the Rafah border, in other words, when they controlled the terminal, there was no political problem with transferring goods through the terminal. That terminal originally, by the way, was it wasn't a product terminal. It was for civilians to cross. So it wasn't actually equipped for large-scale assistance. But we operated that as much as we could. The restrictions were being put by the Israelis that anything going through the terminal had to go down to Netzarim to be searched there before they went up to the Rafah terminal. Now the Israelis have torn down the Palestinian terminal completely. They had forces in that area. So we would appear to be providing humanitarian aid to the Israelis. And that is illogical. But nevertheless, we have continued to provide humanitarian aid through the terminals. We've continued to airdrop humanitarian aid as well. And we will continue to try to find that fine line between not stopping humanitarian aid and not allowing the politics of the region, the losses in the region to be misconstrued politically. One of the requests that had been made in the past was, okay, if you don't want the Palestinians to suffer in the Gaza area, you take them. That basically, you take them under the guise of humanitarian support. That basically means help the Israelis de-Palestinize the Gaza area, reduce the population density in Gaza. We'd be playing in the hands of the Israelis, helping them de-Palestinize the territories. And we're not going to do that. But we have opened the border for foreigners. We have opened the border for Palestinians needing humanitarian aid and some special circumstances. So it's a very painful, difficult dilemma, but we're trying to work through it.
Mr. Fahmy, we spoke about Palestinian suffering in Gaza, but Hamas described the October 7 attack as an act of armed resistance. How do you believe this attack, which escalated the whole Gaza conflict, has benefited ordinary Palestinian civilians?
Well, I don't think that it had benefited ordinary Palestinian civilians, but regrettably, over the last 75 years, I can give you numerous cases of Israelis attacking Palestinians, civilians in the West Bank and in Gaza, including while they're praying in mosques. And frankly, the violence breeds violence. And it's not only, by the way, from one side versus the other. If you just remember very quickly, those who killed Ishaq Rabin were Israelis, Israeli extremist who was against Rabin's attempt to achieve peace with the Palestinians. So I don't know where the violence will start next, but I'm not going to put at the same moral level occupier with the occupied. And you can't take one incident and say, this is the beginning of the problem. The problem started back in 48. So, but again, given our long history, I don't want to spend time on counting how many deaths were caused by each side. I want to focus my efforts on how do we resolve this once and for all so that neither side faces deaths in the future. And that's not going to be by giving an additional support for the strong versus the weak, because balances of power shift. And frankly, if you don't deal with the frustration with not being able to have a basic well-being, not being able to have a national identity, you will shift conflicts from conflicts between combatants on both sides to conflicts between civilians on both sides. And that's very, very dangerous. So end the occupation, provide security for all in the region, Arabs and Israelis, and let's move towards peace. That's the only way to end this conflict. Security arrangements are a complementary step, but they can't stand on their own.
So do you think Netanyahu's goal to completely eliminate Hamas is realistic, or is it just an unattainable ambition?
I think it's a what's the best word for it? I think it's a gimmick. Netanyahu does not want the end of violence in the region. For him, Israel being, quote unquote, under the guise of a threat, be that from Hamas, or be that from Iran, or be that from Hezbollah, be that from the Golan, you name it, he always comes up with a threat. And you shouldn't forget that he is actually quoted in interviews a while before October 7th, saying that he's supporting Hamas because it helped divide the Palestinian body politique and therefore weaken them in their pursuit of a two-state solution. So these are basically Netanyahu tactics to continue the level of tension. The minute the tension stops, then accountability starts. And that's what he's concerned about.
Right. So do you think the US is playing an effective role in facilitating a truce? Or is Washington's bias towards Israel undermining any real chance for peace? Also, do you think the Middle Eastern conflict could be settled if Trump returns to the White House?
I normally don't answer questions with if. You asked me 3 of them. So it's very difficult to answer, but I will try my best out of respect to you and your invitation. The US's role is biased. It was instrumental in not solving this over the last 70 years because it provided Israel with a political shield against accountability. And it continued to provide Israel with a huge amount of weapons and economic support. That's the first point. Secondly, their present bias, not allowing Israel to be held accountable in different legal procedures, is also a source, a liability to the process. Having said that, the reality is, if we can push the regional parties towards a negotiating process, the US role is important, not as the initiator, but as a support for conclusion. I'll give you specifically the Egyptian-Israeli peace agreement, and for that matter, the Jordanian-Israeli peace agreement. These were initiated initially by Egypt and Jordan with an Israeli counterpart on the other side. And you remember also, even the Oslo process was initiated between Palestinians and Israelis in Norway. But to bring all 3 of these agreements to closure, the American role was important. America has tremendous political weight, besides wealth and military weight, but it has tremendous political weight. So if it is important to bring it on board, I just don't believe that America alone can be a unbiased, honest broker between the parties. So my position is the regional parties have to really want to pursue peace with all of its difficulties and problems. The international community has to come out and speak out much more strongly in doing that, especially the Security Council and the 5 permanent members, but also, frankly, major states like India, Brazil, and I can name a number of other countries who have taken constructive positions or who could take even more constructive ones. But that being said, trying to isolate America out of the package is wrong. We need America, but American politics don't allow for it to be a honest broker, honest and unbiased broker between the parties. So America, yes, but it needs America plus, or the international community plus America.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fahmy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. Always happy to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for watching us, guys. Have a nice rest of the day.